80 years of repetition. Most of what you know about German tanks is not history. It is an echo of Nazi propaganda. The Tiger, the Panther, and the invincible tank aces are parts of a carefully constructed myth. Goebbels and his department designed these images to boost morale. After 1945, mass culture picked up these stories and replicated them without question. The reality was different. British and American tankers in Normandy were terrified of the Tiger. They spoke about it in whispers. They looked for it behind every hedgerow. But the statistics tell another story. In 7 out of 8 encounters, Allied crews met a completely different machine. This vehicle formed the backbone of the Panzerwaffe. It carried the weight of the entire war on its steel shoulders. Yet, documentaries rarely mention its name. This is the story of the Panzer IV and the mechanics of military propaganda. How did these heroes overshadow the real workhorse? It was not an accident. It was not a mistake by modern historians. It was a planned operation. The footage shows polished steel and roaring engines. The radio broadcasts tell of impossible victories. This system still influences public perception today. June 13, 1944. The location was the Normandy town of Villers-Bocage. A battle took place here that became the most publicized episode of tank warfare in history. The sound of clanking tracks filled the narrow streets. Smoke rose above the stone houses. At first glance, a brilliant tactical victory. But in reality, a masterclass in media manipulation. The camera records a single Tiger tank moving through the ruins. It shows burning British Cromwell tanks and abandoned armored cars. One man stands at the center of this narrative, Michael Wittmann. The propaganda machine transformed a tactical ambush into a legendary feat. They needed a hero to hide the crumbling front lines. Events accelerated. The German press office seized the reports. They didn't just report the facts. They staged the aftermath, filmed the wreckage from specific angles, and drafted scripts for the radio. The goal was simple: make the enemy fear a ghost and make the German public believe in a miracle. But this was only the beginning. June 13, 1944. Several Tiger tanks under the command of Michael Wittmann ambushed a British armored column near Villers-Bocage. The engagement was a massacre. In 15 minutes, the Germans destroyed 14 tanks and 15 armored personnel carriers. Burning hulls blocked the road. The smell of scorched oil and cordite filled the air. The Nazi propaganda machine seized the moment. Wittmann became the face of the Waffen-SS overnight. His portrait appeared on the front pages of newspapers across Germany. He was no longer just an officer. He was a symbol of Aryan strength. The state choreographed every detail of his life. At his wedding, the Hitler Youth Choir sang for the guests. Cameras captured the ceremony for national newsreels. Even Adolf Hitler participated. He sent 50 bottles of wine as a personal gift to the newlyweds. The message was clear. Wittmann was the Third Reich's ultimate warrior. Decades passed. Historian John Buckley later noted that many modern researchers still repeat these Nazi myths. They repackage propaganda as historical fact. Historian Stephen Zaloga went further. He called Wittmann the hero of Nazi fanboys. Zaloga pointed out a blunt truth. The most successful tankers were not knights in open combat. They were patient hunters. They hid in shadows and fired from ambushes. They rarely appeared in the newsreels. But in 1944, the propaganda worked. It created a psychological phenomenon known as tiger phobia. Allied tankers began to see tigers in every shadow. Every angular silhouette or long-barreled gun triggered panic. Soldiers opened fire indiscriminately at anything that moved. The footage shows the reality of the front. A British sergeant in Normandy spotted a German tank between 2 hedgerows. He did not wait for identification. He ordered his crew to fire immediately. They destroyed the target. But it was not a Tiger. It was an ordinary Panzer IV. In Normandy, these tanks were 7 times more common than the heavy Tigers. The panic reached the highest levels of command. General Montgomery took action. He banned any mention of Tiger superiority in official reports. He knew the rumors were destroying troop morale. The mere name of the tank caused units to freeze. At first glance, armor was the greatest German weapon, but in reality, fear was more effective than steel. Wars are not won by fear. They are won by logistics and numbers. The myth of the Tiger eventually collapsed. Firepower determined the victor. The Third Reich faced a mathematical problem that propaganda could not fix. The numbers tell a story that breaks the standard narrative: 1,355. That is the total number of Tiger tanks Germany produced during the entire war. For comparison, the Soviet Union produced more T-34s in a single month during its peak production period. The scale of the mismatch was absolute. German factories like Krupp, Wehrmacht, and Nibelungenwerk focused on the Panzer IV. They assembled 8,553 units across all modifications. Production rates climbed steadily. In 1941, only 39 vehicles rolled off the lines each month. By 1944, that number reached 300. June 1944, the Allies land in Normandy. On this section of the front, 41% of German tanks are Panzer IVs, 30% are Panthers. Only 6% are the feared Tigers. These proportions were not a mistake. They revealed a structural failure in the German tank program. The Panzer IV was never meant to fight other tanks. Heinz Guderian designed the machine for a different purpose. He was the architect of the Blitzkrieg. In his manual, the Panzer IV was an infantry support vehicle. It carried a short-barreled 75mm gun. The weapon was built to destroy bunkers and machine gun nests. The plan was simple. The lighter Panzer III would engage enemy armor. The Panzer IV would clear the path for the infantry. The concept worked on paper. It survived the invasions of Poland and France. But the reality changed in the summer of 1941. The German army entered the Soviet Union. On the vast Russian plains, tankers encountered the T-34 and the KV-1. The footage from the front shows the result. German shells bounced off the thick-sloped armor of the Soviet machines. The elegant concept of the Blitzkrieg collapsed. There was no turning back. October 1941. German tank crews realized their shells were useless. The Soviet T-34 carried 76mm guns that shredded German steel from long range. Meanwhile, the German tanks remained targets. The Soviet machines were effectively invulnerable at these distances. Reports from the front lines described a sense of shock. Some officers called it mystical horror. Shells that previously pierced any armor now ricocheted into the sky. German crews fired point-blank at the sloped hulls. They watched as their projectiles bounced off the metal. The footage would show smoke, a flash, and then the shell spinning harmlessly away. General Heinz Guderian witnessed the crisis. He wrote that officers demanded a direct copy of the T-34. They wanted the Soviet vehicle built in German factories immediately. But the high command refused. Pride played a role. Technical limitations played another. Yet the scale of the disaster was undeniable. How did Berlin respond? They couldn't wait years for a new design. Instead, Krupp received an urgent order. They had to modernize the existing Panzer IV platform. In the spring of 1942, a new version emerged. It featured a long-barreled 75mm KWK-40 cannon. The Panzer IV was no longer an infantry support vehicle. It became a dedicated tank destroyer. This wasn't the original plan. There was simply no other choice. The machine worked. It wasn't a masterpiece of engineering. Its strength lay in the numbers. It was easy to mass-produce and simple to repair. Mechanics could keep it in combat readiness in field conditions. The math was brutal. It took 9,000 man-hours to assemble one Panzer IV. A single Tiger tank required over 50,000 man-hours. In a war of attrition, arithmetic matters more than the thickness of the steel. At first glance, a desperate upgrade, but in reality, the backbone of the Wehrmacht. Events accelerated on the production lines. Thousands of units rolled toward the front. The Panzer IV remained the most produced German tank of the war. Arithmetic decided the fate of the divisions. One Tiger could not stop 5 Panzers. The factory became more important than the drawing board. The statistics tell the final story. 1,355 units. That was the initial production goal for a machine that would eventually define the Wehrmacht. While the Tiger was a rare trophy built for parade victories, the Panzer IV became the backbone of the German war machine. It was the only tank to fight from the first day of the conflict to the last. It appeared on every single front where Germany deployed its forces. No other vehicle in the German arsenal matched this record. September 1st, 1939. The Panzer IV crossed the Polish border. 8 months later, in May 1940, it punched through the Ardennes forest into France. These tanks formed the core of Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. History remembers them as the Ghost Division. The unit moved so fast that even German high command lost its position on the map. Rommel sat in the lead vehicle, personally directing the column from the front line. The footage shows the results. While light tanks protected the flanks, the Panzer IV used its 75mm howitzer to smash French defensive lines. This was only the beginning. The same tank models soon operated in the scorching sands of North Africa. They landed in Italy. They held the perimeter in Normandy against Allied landings. Finally, they retreated through the ruins of the Reich all the way to Berlin. It was a matter of survival. The Tiger and Panther tanks arrived too late to change the tide. Early models like the Panzer III became obsolete and were pulled from production entirely. But the Panzer IV endured. It underwent constant evolution through 12 distinct versions, from the AUSF-AE to the AUSF-J. Engineers changed the machine's silhouette. They bolted on thicker armor plates. They swapped short barrels for long, high-velocity guns capable of piercing Soviet steel. Workers added side skirts and anti-cumulative screens to deflect incoming shells. By the end of the war, the design was stripped down to the essentials to save resources, but it never stopped fighting. Thus ended the era of the Panzer IV. 1936. That was when the Panzer IV was designed. By the middle of the war, the factory lines moved faster, quality dropped to save time. Engineers stripped the electric turret drive. They removed viewing devices. It was no longer a legendary machine, it was a metal tool. Mechanics patched holes and swapped engines to keep it moving. The chassis changed too. The original platform became a skeleton for new weapons. The Stug 4 assault gun used it. Anti-aircraft vehicles used it. Designers in the 30s never imagined these heavy guns on their frame. The tank was flexible. It was also cramped and loud. Who sat inside these steel boxes? Bruno Friesen is one example. His story is strange. He was born in Canada. His family were German Mennonites. In 1939, they moved back to Germany. Friesen was 14 years old. 5 years later, he was a Panzer IV gunner on the Eastern Front, a Canadian citizen inside a German tank. He spent his days firing shells at Soviet soldiers. He survived. After the war, he returned to Canada. He lived a quiet life and worked at the Ottawa War Museum. He left memoirs behind. There's no talk of glory in these pages. There's only the smell of oil and the sound of tracks. The footage shows the reality: mud, mechanical failure, and the shadow of Soviet planes. Friesen describes the fear. Near Chernivtsi, his crew sat in an ambush. They waited for hours. They didn't know if the Soviet tanks were coming. They didn't know if their gun would fire first. This was the daily life for thousands of crews. They were not aces. They were not chasing medals. They were trying to stay alive for one more hour. But the Panzer IV was the workhorse of the German army. Every workhorse has a predator. The Red Army had its own specialists. They knew exactly how to turn this machine into a burning wreck. How did they do it? The answer lay in a new generation of Soviet hunters. October 14th, 1914. Dmitry Fedorovich Lavrinenko was born in a Kuban village. The village carried a specific name: Fearless. He spent his entire life proving he belonged there. By October 1941, the situation was critical. German tank columns were driving hard toward Moscow. Lavrinenko was 27 years old. He held the rank of lieutenant and commanded a platoon of T-34 tanks within Colonel Katakov's 4th Tank Brigade. October 6th, 1941. The location was the village of Pervy Voyn in the Ural region. This engagement demonstrated exactly what a professional crew in a superior machine could achieve. What happened when 4 tanks met an entire division? At first glance, a suicide mission, but in reality, a calculated slaughter. Lavrinenko's group of 4 T-34s spotted a massive German column. It belonged to the Wehrmacht's 4th Tank Division. Dozens of armored vehicles moved across the field. Lavrinenko did not retreat. He did not call for backup. He analyzed the terrain and looked for cover. Events accelerated. Lavrinenko positioned his tanks in a deep ambush. He waited until the Germans were in the kill zone. The T-34s opened fire. The result was total destruction. 15 German tanks were left burning in the mud. Lavrinenko personally destroyed 4 of them. Not a single Soviet tank was scratched. He did not want fame. He did not seek out fair duels. He fought to win. General Lelyushenko later described the lieutenant's methods. Lavrinenko was obsessed with camouflage. He didn't just hide his tanks. He gathered heavy logs and positioned them in the brush to mimic gun barrels. The footage from the era shows the result. The Germans spotted the dummies and opened fire. They wasted their shells and revealed their exact positions. Lavrinenko watched from the tree line. He waited until the enemy reached point-blank range. Then he gave the order. The T-34s fired from the flank. The German tanks had no time to rotate their turrets. It was a cold, calculated trap. There was no mistake. It should be noted that these tactics became the gold standard for Soviet tank aces. October 1941. The early T-34 tanks roll onto the battlefield with a critical flaw. They lack a commander's cupola. Visibility is near zero. Inside the cramped turret, the commander must also act as the gunner. He loads, aims, and fires while trying to scan the horizon. Dmitry Lavrinenko ignored these limitations. He personally destroyed 52 tanks. During 75 days of continuous fighting near Moscow, he entered 28 separate engagements. The intensity was extreme. He lost 3 tanks to enemy fire and replaced them. Each time he climbed back into the steel hull to hunt again. 52 German tanks and self-propelled guns were shattered. Most of these were Panzer III and Panzer IV models. These vehicles were the backbone of the Wehrmacht. No other tank commander in any Allied army surpassed this record during the entire conflict. December 18, 1941. Soviet troops liberate the village of Goryuni near Volokholamsk. Lavrinenko stops his machine. He climbs out of the hatch to report his success to the brigade commander. He had just finished his 52nd kill. Seconds later, the sound of an explosion echoes. A German mortar shell lands nearby. A single fragment strikes Lavrinenko in the head. The greatest Allied tank ace dies at 27 years old. The state did not rush to honor him. Lavrinenko did not receive the title of Hero of the Soviet Union until 1990. 49 years passed before the recognition arrived. He was forgotten because his war ended too soon. But another tankman was ignored for a different reason. He survived nearly until the end of the war. He destroyed more armor than anyone else in history. Yet, he never received his country's highest award. Lavrinenko's tactics mirrored the best German aces. He avoided frontal charges. He relied on ambushes, calculation, and patience. There was no room for useless heroism. Among his German enemies was a man meant to be the symbol of the Panzerwaffe. His name should have been legendary, but it never happened. June 1941. Kurt Knispel entered the war as a simple loader and gunner. He was assigned to a Panzer IV in the 12th Panzer Division under Army Group Center. His crew included Lieutenant Hellman and his close friend, Alfred Rubbel. They moved east. The tank tracks ground through the encirclement at Minsk and the ruins of Smolensk. They fought in the frozen trenches near Leningrad and took part in the final push toward Moscow. By January 1942, Knispel had already recorded 12 confirmed kills. His commanders noticed a pattern. Knispel possessed a rare physical gift. He could judge distance by eye with mechanical precision. He hit targets with the first shell, while others needed 3. Later, he achieved the impossible. He targeted a Soviet T-34 at a distance of 3,000 meters. He fired once. The tank erupted in flames. Most crews considered such a distance a waste of ammunition. For Knispel, it was a recorded fact. But this was only the beginning. In early 1943, the Army sent him for retraining. He traded the Panzer IV for the heavy Tiger tank. The results were immediate. During the Battle of Kursk, the scale of destruction increased. Knispel destroyed 27 Soviet tanks in just 12 days of combat. He sat in the gunner's seat, pulled the trigger, and watched the hulls rip open. The footage from the era shows the sheer speed of these engagements. The Tiger's long 88mm gun became his primary tool. By the end of the war, the numbers were staggering. Knispel reached 168 confirmed victories. This was the highest score of any tank ace in World War II. He surpassed even Michael Wittmann. He was the only non-commissioned officer whose name appeared in official Wehrmacht radio reports. He was a legend among the crews. Yet, a railway station near Krakow. In the middle of the platform, an Einsatzgruppe officer began beating Soviet prisoners of war. Kurt Knispel did not look away. He stepped forward and beat the officer himself. Only his impeccable combat record saved him from a court-martial. The military police filed the report, but the command tore it up. They needed his skills at the front more than they needed discipline in the rear. According to his comrade Alfred Rubel, Knispel never sought personal glory. In controversial situations, he did not argue. He willingly ceded his kills to other crew members to boost their morale. He cared about the result, not the tally. Joseph Goebbels personally oversaw the creation of a cult around tank aces like Michael Wittmann. He searched for faces that fit the posters, but Goebbels never once mentioned Knispel's name in his diaries. Germany's best tank commander was useless for propaganda. He refused to cut his hair, he refused to wear the clean uniform. He refused to play by the rules of the Reich. April 28, 1945. 10 days remained until the end of the war. Knispel's King Tiger moved through a field near the Czech village of Vostis. A sudden explosion rocked the hull. An enemy shell hit the tank. A piece of jagged shrapnel struck Knispel in the head. He never regained consciousness. He died from his wounds in a field hospital. He was 23 years old. For several decades, his grave remained unmarked. There was no headstone and no ceremony. In 2013, Czech searchers began an excavation. They found the remains in a rusted army dog tag. The metal confirmed the identity: Knispel, Lavrinenko, Friesen. These names represent thousands of unnamed crews. They are part of a story that the propaganda of both sides chose to ignore. The footage does not show them. These were the men who actually carried the weight of the war on their shoulders. July 1943, the fields near Kursk. This was the largest tank battle in human history. Germany committed approximately 2,500 tanks and assault guns. This represented almost 70% of all armored vehicles on the Eastern Front. The air smelled of diesel and scorched metal. The German command placed special hopes on their new heavy steel. Of the massive force, only 146 were Tigers. Another 200 were the new Panthers. Operation Citadel was designed to be a triumph for these machines. The Panthers were held in reserve specifically for this strike, but there was no victory. Instead, the operation became a mechanical failure. The sound of grinding gears filled the air. The new vehicles broke down on the march before they even saw the enemy. The triumph turned into a retreat. Thus ended the myth of the invincible weapon. 5 days. That is how long the new Panther tanks lasted during their debut. Engines caught fire without a single enemy hit. Transmissions snapped in the deep mud. The design was a failure. By the end of the first week, the repair parks were full. The neutral zone was littered with burning hulls. The burden shifted back to the Panzer IV crews. They were the ones left to face the Soviet guns. This pattern repeated until the final surrender in 1945. The Tigers won the battles seen in the newsreels. They were the stars of the screen. Meanwhile, the Panzer IV held the front line. It remained in the shadow of the Reich's propaganda machine. History remembers the legends. It forgets the workers. 6,000 heavy tanks became myths. 8,553 Panzer IVs became statistics. Only experts remember the numbers now. The oblivion continues to this day. Look at any ranking of the best tanks of the war. The Panzer IV always loses to the Tiger or the Panther. This happens despite one fact. The Panzer IV was the backbone of the Panzerwaffe from the first day to the last. We still view the conflict through the lens of Goebbels. We do not even realize it. But there is a lesson here. Miracle weapons do not win wars. Heroes on propaganda posters do not win wars. The footage shows grease-stained men in cramped steel boxes. They did their jobs day after day. They did not expect glory. They did not wait for rewards. They simply fought. Invincible and Lavrinenko never met, but they fought with the same rhythm. No showing off, no chasing medals. They operated with the cold calculation of professionals. They understood one truth. A soldier never wants a fair fight. He wants every advantage possible. The records show the cost. Both men died before reaching the age of 30. Their own countries forgot them. Invincible did not fit the perfect image for the cameras. Lavrinenko died too early to become a symbol. History remembers the Tiger and Michael Wittmann. But the war was fought by the Panzer IV and thousands of nameless crews. No newsreels were made for them. The machines were scrapped. The names were filed away. The story ended there.